The story usually starts with doorbell footage, a scene that feels way too familiar in the petty kingdoms of American suburbia. Two men are standing on a porch, trying way too hard to look like cops. They've got the ill-fitting black uniforms, the tactical vests, and cheap, shiny badges that catch the porch light like toys. They're the foot soldiers of a homeowners association, sent on a mission of pure intimidation. But today, they've made a spectacular mistake. The door they've knocked on belongs to the one person they should have just left alone. This is the story, now an absolute legend online, of how a racist HOA's power trip came to a screeching, panicked halt. It's a tale of what happens when fake authority runs headfirst into the real thing. Now, while the specific details have taken on a life of their own, a sort of modern-day folk tale about justice, the themes at its core are painfully real. The abuse of power by HOAs is not a myth. And the racial discrimination that often fuels these disputes is a documented plague on American neighborhoods. This story, in all its viral glory, is for every person who has ever been harassed by a neighbor with a clipboard and a god complex. It's the ultimate Uno reverse card, a moment where the bullies find out they messed with the wrong one. Section 1, a neighborhood under siege. Before the doorbell ever rang, there was a quiet, calculated campaign of harassment. In the story, our protagonist is a woman named Jasmine. She's a black woman, a professional with a demanding job, who chose a quiet cul-de-sac for its supposed peace. But her new HOA board, and specifically its president, saw an outsider. The president of this fictional Oakwood Terrace HOA was a woman we'll call Carol, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. Her reign was one of selective enforcement and thinly veiled bigotry. And when Jasmine moved in, Carol's reign found a new target. It started small. The first notice arrived a week after Jasmine moved in: improper lawn maintenance. Jasmine looked out at her perfectly green lawn, serviced by the same company half the neighborhood used. Confused, she called the management company, who vaguely mentioned a neighbor complaint. It was absurd, but she had her landscapers trim it again. A week later, another notice. Her trash bins. According to the bylaws, they couldn't be visible from the street after 8 p.m. on pickup day. Jasmine had rolled hers in at 8:15 p.m. Someone had been watching. Waiting. The microaggressions became a steady drip of psychological warfare. "We're trying to maintain a certain standard here," Carol would say at the community mailbox, her eyes lingering on Jasmine's car. The implication was clear, a poison dart wrapped in polite suburban chatter. This kind of targeted harassment isn't just a story. In the real world, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has charged HOAs like the one in Providence Village, North Texas, with racial discrimination. That HOA was accused of creating rules specifically to force out black families, a stark reminder that behind petty rules about trash cans, a much uglier reality can exist. Jasmine wasn't just another resident to Carol, she was a threat to the homogeneous world Carol had built. The campaign escalated. Fines started appearing. $50 for the lawn. $25 for the trash bins. Jasmine paid the first few to avoid conflict, but they kept coming for increasingly ridiculous reasons. A potted plant was an unapproved exterior modification. Jasmine began documenting everything. She saved every email, took time-stamped photos, and built a case. She knew this wasn't about bylaws, it was about being pushed out. The final straw for Carol seems to have been when Jasmine, after getting a fraudulent fine for over $500, sent a calm email to the entire board. She attached her portfolio of evidence and stated that she would no longer be paying baseless fines, and if the harassment continued, she'd seek legal counsel. To Carol, this was a declaration of war. Her authority had been challenged. She decided it was time to escalate beyond paper threats. She was going to send a message. And that decision would lead two fake cops to a U.S. Marshal's doorstep. Section 2, the knock on the door, the confrontation begins. The men on the porch looked like they bought their cop costumes at a party store. The uniforms were a little too black, the fabric a little too stiff. The patches on their shoulders had a generic eagle with the words, Community Enforcement, stitched underneath. It was all designed to create just enough confusion and fear to ensure compliance. They weren't police, but they were hoping they looked close enough. Jasmine opened the door, and her internal alarm bells, honed by years of training, went off immediately. She saw threats, not officers. She clocked the details in an instant, the unmarked Crown Victoria at the curb, the men's nervous energy, the way they rested their hands near their sidearms like they'd seen in movies. "Good morning," the taller one said, his voice cracking slightly. "Ma'am, we're with the Homeowners Association Enforcement Division. We have an order to inspect your property." Jasmine's face was a mask of calm. "Homeowners Association Enforcement Division," she repeated. "Never heard of it." This wasn't in their script. They were used to fear and apologies, not calm scrutiny. "It's a new initiative, ma'am," the stockier one chimed in. "To handle non-compliant residents. We have a warrant here." He held up a clipboard with a document boldly titled, Warrant of Inspection and Penalty Enforcement. Jasmine didn't even glance at it. "That's not a warrant," she said simply. "A warrant is a legal document issued by a court and signed by a judge. What you have there is a piece of paper." The men exchanged a nervous look. Their facade was cracking. "Ma'am, we're authorized by the HOA board to..." The first one started. Jasmine cut him off. "Authorized to do what? Trespass on my property? Impersonate law enforcement officers?" As she spoke, she made sure her doorbell camera had a clear view. This is where these intimidation tactics fail, they rely on the victim not knowing their rights. But they'd chosen a victim who had spent her career enforcing federal law. The stocky one decided to double down. "Look, lady, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you refuse entry, we are authorized to detain you for interfering with an HOA investigation." The word detain hung in the air. That's the moment they crossed a bright red line. An HOA has absolutely no power to detain anyone. Doing so while pretending to be law enforcement is a collection of felonies. "Let me see your identification," she demanded. The first man fumbled for a laminated card identifying him as Officer Davis. It had the same cheap eagle logo. No agency, no ID number. "Officer Davis," Jasmine said, reading the name. "And your partner?" "Officer Smith," the stocky one grunted. "Officer Davis and Officer Smith," Jasmine repeated. "And you believe you have the authority to detain me?" "That's right, ma'am," Davis said, trying to regain his footing. Official business, Jasmine mused. She had let them talk, threaten, and identify themselves. They had just dug their own grave. Now, it was time to push them in. Section 3, the Uno reverse, the reveal. Jasmine let the silence stretch, letting their stupidity hang in the air. The two men, Davis and Smith, shifted on their feet, their bravado quickly curdling into uncertainty. "So, you're claiming to be law enforcement officers," Jasmine stated, locking it in on the recording. "We are enforcement officers for the association, yes," Davis affirmed, his voice getting weaker. Jasmine gave a slow nod. "That's very interesting," she said, her voice dropping. "Because I'm in law enforcement too." That one sentence changed everything. Smith let out a short, incredulous scoff. "Yeah, right, lady." Ignoring him, Jasmine locked her eyes on Davis. "And in my line of work, we take it very, very seriously when people pretend to be us." She slowly reached inside her jacket. Their eyes widened. For a second, they probably thought she was reaching for a gun. But her hand emerged holding a black leather wallet. She flipped it open with a practiced flick of her wrist. There, against the dark leather, sat a gleaming, heavy medallion, a 5-pointed star inside a circle, crowned by an eagle. Engraved in the center were the words, U.S. Marshal. Beside it were her official credentials, her photo clear under the seal of the United States Department of Justice. It was real. It was heavy. And it's one of the most respected symbols of federal law enforcement in the country. The color drained from both men's faces. Their tough guy act evaporated, replaced by the raw, slack-jawed panic of kids caught setting a fire. Officer Davis looked like he was going to be sick on her welcome mat. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You two have made a number of very serious, career-ending mistakes this morning," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "Let's list them, shall we? First, trespassing. Second, harassment. Third, trying to enforce a fraudulent document." She took a step forward, and they both recoiled. "But you really went for the gold medal when you decided to impersonate officers. That's a state felony. However," she let the word hang in the air, "when you pretend to be acting under the authority of the federal government, that's a violation of 18 U.S. Code, Section 912. Their eyes were wide with pure terror. "That's a federal felony," Jasmine continued, her voice cold and clinical. "It carries a penalty of up to 3 years in prison. And when you threaten to illegally detain someone while doing it, you can add Section 913 to the list. That's another 3 years. She paused, letting it all sink in. The threat of an HOA fine was a joke. The threat of 6 years in federal prison was not. "But here's the real kicker," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You didn't just impersonate officers to intimidate a civilian. You did it to a federal officer. Prosecutors tend to get very enthusiastic about cases like that." The transformation was complete. They weren't fake cops anymore. They were just two terrified men, caught in a trap of their own making, staring at the real thing they had so foolishly mocked. The silence on the porch was broken by a stammer from Davis. This is a misunderstanding," he sputtered. "We were just. Carol told us." "Carol told you to commit federal felonies?" Jasmine asked. "I'm going to enjoy hearing her explain that. Now, put your hands where I can see them, and back away from my door." It was an order. But their survival instinct wasn't to comply, it was to flee. Smith was the first to break. He turned, stumbled off the porch, and sprinted across the lawn toward their car without looking back. Davis hesitated for a split second, then he bolted too, his community enforcement hat flying off his head and tumbling across the grass. Jasmine didn't chase them. She didn't have to. She stood on her porch, phone in hand, recording their escape. She zoomed in on the Crown Victoria as it sped away, capturing the license plate perfectly. The moment the car was gone, she dialed 911. "This is U.S. Marshal Jasmine Mitchell," she said, "all business. I am at my personal residence. I've just had an incident with 2 individuals impersonating law enforcement officers. I have video evidence and their license plate number. I need a unit dispatched to take a report." The arrival of real police was a study in contrasts. They were professional and respectful. When Jasmine showed them her credentials, they understood they weren't just on a simple homeowner complaint, they were assisting a federal officer. They watched the doorbell footage, and one of them shook his head. They messed with the wrong house. As the story goes, the investigation was swift. With a clear license plate and video of their faces, it didn't take long for police to identify Davis and Smith as Mark and Paul. Mark, it turned out, was Carol's nephew. Neither had any law enforcement experience. They were arrested later that day. The pair who had played cop in the morning now found themselves in real handcuffs. The charges were serious, impersonating a peace officer and conspiracy. But this was just the start. Jasmine had also contacted the local FBI field office and the U.S. Attorney's office. The focus quickly shifted to the person who had orchestrated it all, Carol. When confronted, Mark confessed everything, admitting his aunt had hired them, bought the fake uniforms, and told them to scare the new resident into compliance. The next day, a detective's car pulled up to Carol's house. The self-appointed queen of Oakwood Terrace was arrested for conspiracy. Her reign was over. CTA This story, whether it's a precise account or an internet legend, is a powerful example of what happens when petty tyrants go too far. But it also highlights the very real problem of HOA overreach. Have you ever had a run-in with an out-of-control HOA? Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences help shine a light on these issues. And if you want to see more breakdowns of entitled people getting the justice they deserve, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Section 5. The legal fallout and broader implications in the narrative. The legal consequences for Mark, Paul, and Carol are severe. For the two fake cops, the U.S. Attorney's Office presses federal charges. Facing years in federal prison, both men take plea deals, leaving them with felony convictions that will follow them for life. For Carol, the architect of the plan, the situation is even worse. By directing her minions against a U.S. Marshal, she poked the federal bear. Investigators in the story began digging into the HOA's finances, uncovering a pattern of fraud and abuse. The Justice Department even looked at charging her under RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, arguing the HOA was run like a criminal enterprise. While such charges against an HOA are extremely rare, the story uses it to show how badly she messed up. The HOA itself implodes. Hit with a massive lawsuit from other homeowners, the association is financially ruined, and the court appoints a neutral third party to manage the community. The power structure Carol built is completely dismantled. This story resonates so deeply because it touches on a raw nerve. It's a story about the ugly reality of racism that can hide behind trimmed hedges. Jasmine was targeted not because her lawn was messy, but because she was a black woman who didn't fit into Carol's prejudiced worldview. This reflects documented cases where HOAs have been used as a tool for racial discrimination. It's also a story about the intoxicating nature of petty power. HOA board members are just volunteer neighbors. But in the wrong hands, that sliver of power corrupts, turning ordinary people into tin-pot dictators. Carol and her fake cops are an extreme example, but they represent the final stop on a journey that starts with one selectively enforced violation notice. Conclusion: in the end, this is a story about consequences. It's the ultimate real-world enactment of play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Carol and her fake cops decided to find out what would happen if they pushed a quiet, professional woman too far. They found out they weren't just messing with another homeowner. They were messing with a woman dedicated to upholding the law, who possessed a calm and courage their bullying could never break. They thought their fake badges gave them power. Jasmine showed them what real power looks like. It isn't loud or arrogant. It isn't found in a cheap uniform or a fake warrant. Real power is quiet confidence, deep knowledge, and the unshakable authority of the law itself. The story of Jasmine and the HOA is a deeply satisfying cautionary tale. Be careful who you try to intimidate. You never, ever know who you're really messing with.